everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today, for this last week within the month of love, I thought it would be interesting to briefly discuss a romantic drama book that has been recognized for, I believe, various awards, and it's been one of those books that I think a lot of people have become more aware of over the years. As you can see by the title of this video, I'm going to be discussing Cold Mountain. Now, a while back, like probably eons ago, I did discuss the movie that this book is adapted from, or that this, that the movie is adapted, or that basically I discussed the film version that was the adaptation of the book. I sort of discussed within that review how I thought it came off as very powerful and interesting. So I thought it would be cool to kind of discuss the book, since the book has been thoroughly recognized and actually discusses romantic love in sort of a more tragic and dramatic way. This book in particular not only revolves around love, but sort of the things that sort of come in the way, and that being a large part war. I think war has often been used as a sort of a tool when it comes to sort of initiating some form of romantic tragedy. You know, the man goes off to fight and the woman stays at home waiting for him to return. And it sort of follows that format. But what I do like about this story is that the way it executes that that plot scenario, I think really works to the story's advantage, because it creates a very interesting way of looking at this sort of romantic tragedy. But basically, in case you are not aware of what Cold Mountain is about, besides what I've mentioned, Edmund is a young man who goes off and fights for the South during the American Civil War, and Ada Monroe is the woman he falls in love with before he goes off to fight. Sometimes within stories like these, usually it goes from either routes. It's either the route of the person who's in the war serves in the war, or they both maybe serve in the war in some capacity, and then you see sort of the transition once the war is over. Other times, usually I think this one is not as common, but it happens in this one, is desertion, because at one point Edmund does desert the war because he finds it to be really cruel and ridiculous and serves no purpose, so why serve in this war? That is pointless. So he decides to go back home, and he sort of feels that Ada is that home for him. And that's sort of addressed within the book, if you choose to read it. And there are also various little hints and differences between the book and the adaptation. There are some people that probably will like the book more because there's a little bit more in-depth information as opposed to the film, which shortens things up a little bit. But I think both the adaptation as well as the book serve the story well. I think the writing uh, is very human. It seems to flow really well with the sort of survival aspect. And that's usually something that happens when you see the desertion of somebody who leaves the war, because they have to try to survive. And that's not really a whole lot, that's not really easy, because uh, usually there are people who want to come after you for deserting, and you sort of see this within the book as well, and also within the adaptation. But uh, the interesting thing that I find about this story, and what I like about it a lot, is that it treats the survival aspect with a lot of uh, grit, and um, and you really do see Edmund pushing himself um, to that point uh, of being sort of on the edge, but he knows he has to, because that's his only way and only chance of really survival and finding some kind of peace and love and happiness. So that's really at the heart of the story, and you sort of see that struggle, and you see sort of the tragedies behind that struggle, and you also see too how uh, Adia, Ada, I think it's Adia or Adia. Yeah, I think that's how it's pronounced, but it's spelled like Ada, Ada, even though it's Adia. But you also see her story as well, and they sort of go back and forth between the two. So it doesn't really feel as one-sided of a story. You do see them both trying to kind of survive. And you'll see how there's tragedy that happens within Adia's life, and she sort of has to adjust to those circumstances and sort of rise to the occasion. And at the same time, you see how Edmund is trying to survive and escape any sort of persecution that and consequences that result from deserting. Because again, deserting way back in the day, and I think even to this day, we don't treat desertion as like as a uh, as a honorable thing. But back in the Wade day, desertion was almost a complete dishonor um, to the cause, so to speak. And deserting means betrayal almost. It's almost like you've become the enemy because you betrayed by leaving and not participating. So oftentimes that was with death. So we are dealing with that kind of a desertion. It's not, because again, sometimes the desertion is treated just as like a survival thing, just hit the person going from one place to the other to try to finally get back. Whereas with Edmund, it's not only just him trying to get back; it's him trying to escape the possibility of um, somebody ultimately wanting him dead because of the fact that he chose to not participate anymore within the war. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I think are going on within the story. But I think at the heart of it, it's really about, you know, trying to fulfill that sense of happiness, to going back to having peace and stability and love in such a very chaotic setting. Um, so I think that's something that's really a core part of a lot of what these stories try to kind of get across. And I think this one executed it in a very unique and interesting way. Um, and I think it ultimately works to the story's advantage as a result. So I think it's definitely worth a recommendation if you're interested. The characters are unique, the story, even though it does have these little formulaic things that people could see from other stories. I think the way it tells it, I think, ultimately serves its purpose justice, and you sort of do see the underlying tragedies that happen, and you sort of see, who lives, who dies, and you see what ultimately the characters develop into, or what they become once the story is, or what becomes really of the characters once the story is finished. So really there is this sense of a conclusion, and a sense of, I think, unpredictability too. But once you've seen it, you clearly know what ends up happening. But if you haven't seen it, there probably might be some surprises here and there, depending if you see it coming or not. Depending. But I think personally for me it wasn't as predictable. But I think that only might be because I did actually watch the film before I read the book. So I kind of already knew what was going to happen. But at the same time, I felt like if I hadn't watched the film, I probably wouldn't have predicted the outcomes of the book. But again, I'm sure there's some people who might say that it has this level of predictability to it. But I think it ultimately does serve the story. It serves in its themes, and its characters, I think work, and ultimately its story feels like it feels like it's trying to say what ultimately is sort of presented within the plot. And the author, I think, does it in a way that I think ultimately is very effective and works. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say when it comes to this book in particular. It's just one of those love stories where you do feel the sort of struggle to return to and find a sense of happiness, and you do really kind of root for the characters to ultimately gain that happiness in the end. So I think that's something important, even if the certain things that may happen may not be as pleasant. But yeah, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.